Hey, this is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont Senate. Sorry for a little bit of a technical glitch here at the beginning. Um, it is April 2nd, and we find ourselves both seeing some of the fruits of social distancing, also seeing projections that are somewhat haunting as we think about the weeks ahead of us. So let me begin by starting with some of the data that's come out today, and that suggests that there are now 338 people who have tested positive for COVID-19 and 17 who have passed away. It is, as something I always wish to remind people, that each person has intrinsic value. And so while I mention the total numbers, I don't want it to be lost that each person has family, friends, and that their personal circumstances are worth noting on their own right. And so I hesitate to say the large numbers. It can seem cold and clinical, but it just gives a sense of our collective challenge and the impact it's had, but don't want to appear at all cold to the individuality of the people who've suffered and or died as a result of this infection. Yesterday I talked a little bit to begin with about the number of people who work in healthcare settings who have found themselves not only on the front lines, but also disproportionately impacted. I pointed out that about more than 10% of all the people who've tested positive have been people who work in healthcare facilities of some sort. Yesterday, I had mentioned that Burlington Health and Rehab, which had been the primary healthcare facility that had a particularly high number of positive tests, Birchwood Terrace in Burlington, off of North Avenue in the New North End, is now also seeing increased numbers with the latest information. So right now, Burlington Health and Rehab, which has faced a tremendous amount of pressure on their facility, has now had 22 positive tests. 14 of them are people who work there, and 22 are residents, and they have also had 8 people who have succumbed to COVID-19 or were infected and passed away, and the exact cause of death is still being determined. Birchwood Terrace now has had 14 total people test positive. This goes to show how vulnerable congregate settings are, especially when they have people who are already in compromised health conditions. So obviously, we continue to have a tremendous amount of gratitude for the people who are at the front lines. We often talk about people who work in healthcare and put them rightly on a different level in terms of their sacrifice for others and the risk they put themselves at. Now we're seeing that in practice. And so it is just worth reflecting on. I do also want to say that one of the things that is challenging right now is, on the one hand, we know that the social distancing that is in place is having a positive effect in ways that keep people at a reduced risk of being infected. In fact, we now know that in terms of people's driving around and in their cars and mobility, have actually been moving around in vehicles at a lower rate than our worst winter storms this year. And that is a trajectory that continues to go down with each day that the stay-home order is in place. So just to put it in perspective, imagine the worst snowstorm, which was about a month and a half ago for this year. That is roughly the amount of people who are still on the roadways, are the same number that were out during that horrendous storm. And while we think this is in some ways good news, that people are taking the stay-home order seriously and that it is reducing the risk that people will be infected, we also know that the path that this virus takes is that it starts gradually and then it spikes up before it starts coming back down. So today the governor announced a couple new efforts to try to be ready for that moment. I had mentioned that Landmark College in Putney had opened up a, uh, a testing facility, um, which was helping expand the number of tests that would be available in the southeastern corner of the state. Today, it was announced that two additional surge capacity hospital expansion services, if you will, are ready to go. One is a 400-bed equivalent at the Champlain Valley Expo in Essex. The other is 150 beds in Rutland County that will be managed by Rutland Regional Medical Center. The 400 beds at the Expo are largely going to be served by um, the servicemen and women of the National Guard. There are also 50 mobile units or flexible units in Brattleboro and another 50 flexible units at Mount Ascutney in Windsor County, so covering the southeast part of the state, while some of the larger facilities that are being built for surge capacity are happening in northwestern and central Vermont. This is all in addition to the 50 bed spaces that have been created at the Barry Auditorium, the 50 at the Pearly Complex in St. Albans, and then the 150 at UVM's Gutterson Fieldhouse. So I mention all that. If you just put what I've just said in perspective, it is 650, 750. It's about 900 potential bed spaces for people with varying levels of acuity for their medical needs in the coming days. And that just goes to show how determined we are in state government to be ready for whatever surge hits us. The challenge, of course, is making sure that we have the right facilities in place for people with very, very acute needs. To use one example, the number of ICU beds, if the surge goes in sort of the average of predictions, is 211 ICU beds. The state has 135 available, so we're having to figure out how to adjust our facilities to address the potential surge number that we might see. There are 93 ventilators available at present. We expect that if the surge hits the numbers that are currently being projected, we would need 114. So it is, when you're 21 ventilators short at a surge, that is not going to be something we're happy about. So we'll want to make sure that we continue to do everything we can to secure this kind of medical equipment so that people get the treatment that they need in a timely way. I want to briefly tell you a little bit about some legislation that we may come back to Montpelier to take up next week. We had, as I've indicated in previous updates, passed emergency legislation to help with some flexibility in healthcare services, also around unemployment insurance, and to allow municipal government to operate under these extraordinary circumstances. Next week, among the things that the Senate is likely to come back to consider, one is to build on something we did last time. 2 weeks ago, we passed a provision which would allow wills to be executed and witnessed remotely instead of in person. Many people are very concerned about their well-being because of either age or chronic illness that might make them susceptible to COVID-19. They are hoping to maybe adjust their wills. Well, we want to extend that same consideration to powers of attorney. Some people want to make sure that they're being flexible now to allow someone to make decisions should they be on a ventilator, should their health take a very bad turn. The other is to allow deeds to be witnessed remotely, as some people want to make sure that their house is in order in case the worst were to happen. The movement of property is another area where we want to provide additional flexibility in this unusual time. Another issue that doesn't come straight to mind but is really important is the issue of statute of limitations. So many civil proceedings in our courts, not everything that goes on in our courts is a murder case or something like that, but many civil cases have statutes of limitations. But right now, because the courts are effectively closed for normal business, We do not want participants in civil cases to either be advantaged or disadvantaged as a result of the normal statute of limitations. So what we are considering is a 60-day extension of the statute of limitations for any case that's going through the process right now, 60 days beyond the end of the emergency order. So when the courts open back up and start clearing the decks of all the things that have built up, they will have the ability to take those cases up without favoring one side or the other. Our Finance Committee is looking at a challenging issue about tax deadlines. We've already extended the date by which people have to submit their corporate or personal income taxes. Rooms and meals and sales and use can be held on to at this point effectively indefinitely. But many municipalities have property tax bills that go out, and the question is what will happen under the current conditions with many people who won't be able to pay, and yet municipalities needing the money to continue to operate. So we are looking at ways, working with municipalities to figure out how to give some flexibility so that people can reasonably pay their tax bills. Our Economic Development Committee continues to look at the issue of evictions. The Chittenden County Court, as I've mentioned in a previous update, has put a halt on all eviction and foreclosure proceedings. That was just one county court, so it's not the policy for the whole state. And they continue to look at whether there is a process that we should put in place that would effectively put a halt to them, then allow for extenuating circumstances to allow certain proceedings to go if someone is completely destroying a property or it's causing safety issues for the people around them. And then another odd one which comes up in a time of crisis like this is our state Buildings and General Services division have many projects that need to get built on the quick to help deal with this crisis. It could be facilities, like I've described before, to create new hospital bed space. Well, the process normally requires criminal background checks, and we do want to do that, but we want to accelerate the criminal background checks for any companies that are going to do business with the state of Vermont. So those are all sort of things that we feel like our emergency legislation needs. We'll be working with our counterparts in the House to try to get things advanced as quickly as we can to get those bits of flexibility. So at this point I'm going to wrap, but I'm going to close with a brief note. Each day, as I've mentioned, I am sending a brief note of gratitude to somebody or some group of people who have been putting in frontline work during this crisis, but who normally go unnoticed or underappreciated or undervalued. So today I'll be sending it to the staff at HCRS. HCRS is the Mental Health and Drug Treatment Agency serving southern Windsor County and Windham County. I'm also going to be sending one to the staff at the Hannafords in Middlebury. The Hannafords in Middlebury, you may know, is the first supermarket where an individual tested positive for COVID-19, one of the staff people. And I know that while they don't get rich going to work every day, we know how essential they are today. So I hope others will step up and send that bit thanks, expression of gratitude to those who are out there, because if our projections are correct and this whole thing won't even peak until the second or third week of April, just imagine the day after day how draining it is on people physically and emotionally, and they need to know we aren't just thinking of them, but proactively expressing our gratitude to them. So at this point, I'll sign off till tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm going to focus almost entirely on feedback I've received from constituents, highlighting people in the community who have done really amazing things to step up and support their neighbors. So have any things you want me to raise, I'll keep your name out of it, but if you want me to highlight anyone or any organization that's been doing really unbelievable service on behalf of others, that's what I'm going to focus almost all of my Friday daily update on. So I hope to see you then and continue to stay safe. Thanks.